They say betrayal doesn't always come with a warning. It often arrives as a whisper from someone who once tucked you into bed. Mine came on a Tuesday morning, disguised as a phone call from my father, with snow gathering gently on the balcony outside my window. I remember the light, pale, indifferent. The kind of light that drains color from everything it touches. I remember the tea, untouched and cooling on the table, and I remember the words that split something vital open inside me. You don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year. Not, we'll miss you. Not, we wish things were different. Just that clean surgical cut of a sentence as if I were an obligation they were relieved to release. I said nothing for a moment, unsure if I'd heard him right or if my brain was buffering the hurt. The silence between us was thick, but my father didn't fill it. He let it fester. Then he added, with the tone people use when talking about switching brands of paper towels, Kayla's been on edge. She needs a peaceful environment. We thought it's best. Kayla, my sister. The same sister who, a month earlier, had posted a 5-minute reel about her burnout journey while holding a $7 matcha latte and wearing a new North Face jacket. The same sister who had failed 3 business ventures in less than 2 years and somehow managed to walk away from each one without consequence. The one whose emotional weather dictated our family's climate. Kayla needed peace, and so I, Rachel Harper, was exiled. I stared at the wall across my apartment, the paint chipped slightly near the window frame where winter sneaked in. There was a moment where I thought surely he'd backpedal. Say he didn't mean it that way, that it came out wrong. But no. Instead, he doubled down with the kind of forced calm that made my stomach turn. It's just one holiday, he said. You'll be fine. Fine. Like the word meant anything anymore. Like fine described the nights I stayed up calculating how much I could send them without missing rent. Like fine covered the part where I had paid $8,000 over the last 2 years to make sure they didn't freeze in that drafty old house on Juniper Street, the house I used to call home. And still, when the pipes burst last winter and the electric company threatened disconnection, it was my name they called, not Kayla's, mine. And I always showed up, quietly, reliably. I called the oil company, I paid the overdue bills, I rerouted my own needs, dentist appointments, new shoes, weekend breaks, to fill a silence they never acknowledged. But that morning, something inside me cracked wide open. I'm not coming home because Kayla's feelings are fragile? I asked slowly, voice flat as frost. That's the logic? It's not personal, Rachel. It's just... That's where he lost me. Not personal was a cruel thing to say to someone who had spent years being personal. Someone who'd folded blankets, sent care packages, wired money at 2 a.m. because Mom's voice trembled on the phone. Someone who, while never the favorite, was always the fallback. And in that moment, I realized the truth that had been shadowing me for years, but never fully announced itself. I wasn't the daughter. I was the emergency contact. And only when there was a crisis. I stood up so suddenly the chair scraped against the floor. If I'm not family enough to sit at the table, then don't expect me to fund the heater keeping that table warm, I said. And I hung up. The click echoed in the quiet of my apartment. I stood there for a long time, palms sweating, heart pounding, but my mind was strangely clear. I walked to my desk, opened the laptop, and logged into the utility payment portal I'd managed like a secret. I hovered over the Manage Autopay tab, the cursor blinking back at me like it dared me to follow through. And I did. Service canceled, November 2nd, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. As I closed the laptop, I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even tremble. I just stared out the window, watching snow settle on the railing like dust on an old photograph, and whispered to no one, "They'll feel this." And not because I wanted revenge, because I needed release. Because every time I sent money without question, every time I was told, "Don't make a fuss," I trained them to expect me without earning me. Because family isn't supposed to be a subscription you cancel quietly, but sometimes it has to be. If you've ever been the one who gives and gives without being seen, if you've ever kept your family warm while shivering alone, then you already know this story. And if you don't, I'm asking you to listen anyway. because what happened next didn't just change a holiday, it changed everything. Before we go further, if this story is speaking to you, if it's stirring something inside you that you haven't said out loud, I'd love for you to support this channel by subscribing. It helps more than you know, and it's what keeps stories like this going. Stories that tell the truth behind closed doors. Stories like Rachel's. Now, before we continue, I want to ask you something. Imagine this happened to you. Your own father asked you not to come home, not because of something you did, but to avoid upsetting someone else. What would you do? Would you A. Accept it quietly and wait to be invited back next time? B. Draw the line and stop giving without being valued? Comment below with your answer, A or B. I'm really curious how you see this situation. There's no judgment here, just reflection. Now let's get back to the story, because what came after the silence was even louder than Rachel expected. After the call ended, the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like aftermath. Rachel stood motionless for several minutes, her hands still hovering above the laptop, as if the cancellation screen might blink back and undo everything with a new message. It didn't. Service canceled, effective November 2nd? That was it. No apology, no warning to the people she once called home. Just a confirmation email and a sudden sense that her world had stopped rotating around them. Outside, Boulder's early winter was deepening. Snow whispered against the glass in restless gusts, and the sky stayed locked in that silver-gray mood that made the days feel suspended. Rachel moved slowly, deliberately, like someone walking through the ruins of something they'd spent years building. She folded her blanket, rinsed her now cold tea down the sink, and washed the cup with hands that felt steadier than they should. She had always expected that saying no to her family would come with emotional carnage, tears, guilt, the slow crumble of her own resolve. Instead, she felt something eerier, a terrifying kind of clarity. For the first time in a long time, there was no pending obligation. No late-night call about a gas leak. No panicked voicemail from Mom about Kayla needing help with rent just until Friday. There was just stillness and the thrum of the little space heater beside her desk. That night, she slept through without waking up once. The following morning, Rachel woke earlier than usual. Not out of duty, but because her body, unburdened for the first time in years, had nothing to fight against. She made herself a breakfast she'd never had time for before, scrambled eggs with fresh herbs, toast, and grapefruit slices. She even sat at her table instead of eating standing up in the kitchen like she usually did when answering emails or transferring money. She didn't check her phone, not once. Days passed. The quiet grew roots. On Thursday, she found her old journal wedged between two cookbooks she hadn't opened since last Christmas. The leather was cracked at the corners, the edges of the pages curled from moisture. She flipped it open to the last entry, dated over a year ago, written the night she sent $900 to help her parents fix the leaky roof. The entry was 2 paragraphs long and filled with exhaustion, apologies, and a strange sense of pleading. This time, she wrote something different. I canceled the heat. And no one called to say they understood. Then she underlined it. By the weekend, her inbox had started to flicker with signs of life. Her mom wrote first, just one sentence. Rach, the furnace seems off. Can you check it? She read it while sipping chamomile tea on the balcony, legs wrapped in a wool blanket, the city lights flickering beneath a low mist. She didn't answer. The second message came 2 days later. It's getting really cold in the house. Your dad says we should wait it out, but I think something's wrong. Please let me know if you've heard anything. She didn't reply to that one either. Instead, she bought herself a pair of new boots, her first in 3 winters. The sales clerk offered her a store credit card, and for once she smiled and said no, not because she couldn't afford it, but because she didn't need it. She paid in full and walked out with her head high. Then came Kayla's post on Instagram. A photo, heavily filtered, of her curled under 3 blankets on the couch. The caption read, "When even your own blood freezes you out." No mention of names, no tagging, just implication. Rachel stared at the photo for a long minute, then exited the app and deleted it from her phone. She would not let her healing be hijacked by performative suffering. She had given enough. Her life outside her family began to take shape like a new city rising from the fog. She signed up for a pottery class at the local community center. On the first night, she met a woman named Elise who reminded her of a younger version of herself. Quiet, observant, guarded. They shared a wheel and small conversation about favorite authors and soup recipes. Rachel started baking again. She hadn't baked for joy in years, only for holidays that demanded it. Now, she tried things she'd always been too tired to attempt. Honey cornbread with chili, lemon scones, cinnamon pull-apart bread. She brought a batch of pumpkin muffins to her neighbor, Mr. Jennings, a retired jazz musician who lived 2 floors down and always wore a brown beanie regardless of the season. He ate 2 in front of her and declared them better than anything Whole Foods sells. They began a quiet friendship. He lent her vinyl records. She gave him cookies. On Sunday mornings, she brought him coffee from the local cafe, and they sat on the shared stairwell, listening to Coltrane or Miles Davis while watching the snowfall dust the cars. Still, the messages came. Your dad's coughing a lot. The thermostat says 49. We don't know what to do. I saw the oil company cancel the contract. Did something happen? We thought maybe you needed space. Please call Rachel, read them all. She didn't delete them, but she didn't answer either. They were proof. Receipts of years when her love was measured by transactions and her worth calculated in utility bills. She journaled more, wrote poems she didn't plan to share, sat in silence longer than she ever had. Not the kind of silence filled with tension, but the kind that lets you breathe deeper, the kind you earn. And she thought often about the girl she used to be, the one who dropped everything to catch every plate before it could shatter, the one who believed love meant being the solution. She mourned that girl, she honored her, but she didn't want to be her anymore. By mid-November, the messages had slowed. Her mother tried one last time. It's Kayla's birthday. She's not well. Dad says we might need to go stay with a cousin. Things are really hard right now. Just thought you'd want to know. Rachel did not want to know. She wanted peace. She looked around her apartment that evening. The candles she'd lit flickered warmly. The soup she made filled the space with thyme and garlic. Her heater hummed steadily in the corner, never demanding more than it gave. She whispered to the quiet, "This is mine." And it was. She had built this life piece by piece, not out of resentment, but out of reclamation. Her solitude wasn't punishment. It was a promise that her time, her energy, her heart were no longer forfeit to those who called only when something broke. That night, she went to sleep with the windows frosted and her soul finally unfurled. She dreamed not of her parents' house, nor the strained conversations, nor Kayla's tantrums. She dreamed of open roads, warm bread, and laughter shared without obligation. And when she woke the next morning, the sky outside had shifted. The snow had stopped. The sun cast long orange streaks across her kitchen floor, and for the first time in years, Rachel Harper felt like she wasn't surviving her life. She was living it, fully, quietly, Heron. The 3rd Tuesday of November was the kind of cold that clung to your skin long after you'd stepped back inside. Rachel had just come in from a walk, cheeks flushed pink, arms full of groceries, when she'd noticed the silence. Not the comforting kind that wrapped around you like a quilt, but the kind that made the air feel suspended, like something was waiting. She placed the brown paper bag on the counter, carefully setting down a carton of eggs, a small bundle of rosemary, and a block of cheddar she planned to use for soup. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and worn books, a scent she'd grown to love more than she ever loved the perfume of familiarity back home. She was midway through peeling a butternut squash when someone knocked. It wasn't a friendly tap. It wasn't the curious patter of Mr. Jennings from downstairs. It was weighty, intentional. Rachel stilled. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, walked slowly to the door, and looked through the peephole. Her father stood there hunched beneath a too-thin coat, hands jammed into his pockets. His hair was unbrushed, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she'd grown beyond the image of him she used to carry. She didn't open the door fully, just enough to let his eyes meet hers. "Rachel," he said, "we need to talk." The sound of his voice hit her like static, familiar, uncomfortable, loaded. She didn't move. What is there left to say? Your mom's sick. Kayla's not doing well. It's 38 degrees inside that house, he said, the words tumbling out like he had rehearsed them on the drive over. She kept her gaze even. I told you what would happen. You stopped the payments, he said, eyes narrowing. You didn't even warn us. Rachel's mouth tightened. I didn't think I had to announce it. I assumed someone might notice when I was told I wasn't welcome at the table. He stepped forward slightly. She didn't budge. You know we don't understand how that account stuff works. The company never notified us. That's because the contract was under my name. And for 2 years, I handled everything. Quietly. Without complaint, she said. I took your calls at midnight. I transferred thousands when no one else could. I covered mistakes, bills, and breakdowns while you all kept breathing like it was owed to you. His face fell into something between guilt and anger. We were doing our best. Were you? She said, more to herself than to him. Because your best looked a lot like Kayla blowing through your savings, me patching the holes, and everyone pretending that was normal. She's been through a lot, he mumbled. And I haven't? Rachel's voice rose, not loud, but sharp. I've worked double shifts in the snow, eaten pasta for a week straight, so I could send money for repairs, and not once did I ask for anything in return, except maybe a chair at Thanksgiving, a place at my own family's table. There it was. The silence. Not the quiet kind, but the ashamed kind. The kind where the truth sat between them like a third person they both refused to look at. He shifted. Kayla's fragile. We didn't want to upset her. You were willing to upset me, she replied. He winced. This whole thing's gotten out of hand. You're punishing us for one decision. No, Rachel said, her voice steadier than even she expected. I'm just no longer covering for yours. Her father looked past her then, into the warmth of her apartment, the flickering candlelight on the table, the rising steam from a pot on the stove, the soft hum of the heater that didn't require begging or reminders to work. And maybe for the first time, he saw her life for what it was. Built, not gifted. You always said I was the responsible one, she whispered, but what you meant was that I was the reliable one, the one you could lean on without having to say thank you. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, he said, and for the first time his voice cracked. Rachel looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something she hadn't expected. Sadness. Not for what they were, but for what they never tried to be. She could have been their daughter, not their safety net. She could have been cherished, not used. You didn't make me feel that way, she said. You made that my reality. He stepped back. So this is it? She didn't answer. He nodded slowly, pulled his coat tighter. I hope one day you can forgive us. I hope one day you stop needing forgiveness to start acting differently, she said. He lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked away, his footsteps disappearing into the snow-covered hallway carpet. Rachel closed the door slowly. The lock clicked into place, not like a barrier, but like a release. She leaned against the door for a breath, then returned to the kitchen. She chopped vegetables with a new kind of rhythm. Not hurried, not agitated. Grounded, present. The soup simmered thick with garlic and thyme, and she poured herself a bowl. Outside, the cold wind howled. But inside, Rachel Harper sat at her table alone, spoon in hand, heart bruised but not broken, and for the first time, not waiting for the phone to ring. Not afraid of what would happen if she wasn't the one to fix it. She had nothing left to give. And that, she was learning, was a kind of freedom too. The silence after her father left wasn't soothing anymore. It was enormous. It pressed in on the walls of Rachel Harper's apartment like a ghost of all the things she'd carried for years that suddenly had no place to go. She could still feel the outline of his presence on the threshold, like the cold he brought with him hadn't yet melted away. And yet, even in the weight of that aftermath, she didn't question her decision. The next day, she awoke early, not because of obligation, but because the tension she thought she had banished had crept back into her muscles while she slept. She sat at the window with her coffee, watching snow drift in lazy spirals toward the sidewalk below. Boulder was quiet that morning, muffled under a new blanket of white, and the air outside seemed to hold its breath like it knew something was coming. At 8:12 a.m., her phone lit up with a message from her mother. "It's 40 degrees inside the house. We're wearing coats indoors. Please call Rachel." Stared at the screen for a long time before turning it face down. There was no new information, nothing she didn't already know would happen. The heating service had stopped. The house on Juniper Street was as exposed to winter now as she had been to emotional frost for years. She knew the pattern well. First came the quiet assumption that she'd fix it. Then came the light pleading. Then guilt. And if all else failed, Kayla would take the stage. 2 hours later, her sister's message came. Just a screenshot of the thermostat reading 38 degrees, followed by one sentence, "Happy now?" Rachel didn't reply. Instead, she took a long walk through the Pearl Street Mall. The holiday lights had gone up early this year, a hopeful attempt to fight off the gloom that always followed daylight saving. Couples strolled hand in hand, kids threw snowballs near the benches, and a jazz trio played near the bookstore where Rachel had once found a signed copy of a book her mother had forgotten she loved. The world was still spinning. The cold didn't stop the city. It only stopped people who had come to expect someone else would always warm things up for them. That night, she baked banana bread and brought half the loaf to Mr. Jennings. He opened the door with a grin, his jazz records humming softly in the background. "Back to bribe me, I see," he said, winking. "I accept payment in conversation," Rachel replied. They sat for an hour on his couch, trading stories. He talked about the first winter he spent alone after his wife passed, how it felt like his bones had to learn a new kind of stillness. Rachel listened quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea he insisted she take. As she walked back to her apartment, her phone buzzed again. This time a voicemail. Her father's voice was rough, tired. "Rachel, I don't know what's going on, but your mother's fingers are going numb when she does the dishes. Kayla hasn't left her room. I've tried everything I can, but it's just cold." She didn't listen to the rest. She deleted it. The following morning, she received a call from an unknown number. It was the heating oil provider. "Hi, this is Sarah from Mountain Valley Energy. I'm looking to confirm the cancellation for the service at 448 Juniper Street. We haven't heard from the homeowners, and the account was previously under your name." Rachel paused. "That's correct. The contract was canceled at the start of the month. I no longer manage that household's utilities." The woman on the other end hesitated. "Understood. I'll finalize the closure. Thank you." As Rachel hung up, she realized her hand was steady. No shake, no flinch, no urge to call them and fix it. For once, she wasn't unraveling. The messages from her family grew more urgent by the day. Her mother wrote, "Your father refuses to wear more than one layer and is coughing constantly. The windows are icing over from the inside. Kayla's been sleeping on the floor with all the blankets we own. Is there anything you can do?" Kayla, true to form, sent a passive-aggressive tweet. "Nothing like being abandoned by your own blood during a storm. Guess some people's warmth comes with strings." Rachel almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She'd spent years sending warmth without ever tying a single knot, but the moment she stopped, they called it cruelty. That night, the first storm of the season rolled in hard. Weather alerts lit up her phone. Dangerously low temperatures, gusting winds. Power outages reported in several parts of the state. Rachel stayed indoors, wrapped in her fleece blanket. A candle burned near the window. Her favorite Miles Davis track played low from her speaker. She made hot cocoa, stirred in cinnamon, and let the warmth rise through her fingers. She thought of them in that old house, the walls paper thin, the windows drafty. She imagined Kayla upstairs, cocooned in bitterness and hand-me-down guilt. She imagined her father trying to light the old fireplace that hadn't worked properly in years. And she felt, not pity, not satisfaction either, something quieter. The way one might feel walking away from a car wreck you survived, grateful to be alive, even if your legs were still shaking. The next morning, her cousin Haley called. "I just heard from Aunt Karen," she said, not bothering with hello. "The heat's out. They're sleeping in shifts just to stay warm. Kayla tried crashing with a friend but couldn't stay long. Your mom's got a fever." Rachel sat in her reading chair, staring at the snow falling outside. "They told me not to come," she said quietly. "I know," Haley replied. "I also know you paid for everything the last 2 years and never got a thank you." There was a pause. "Are you okay?" Haley asked. Rachel nodded to herself. "For the first time, I think I am." Haley's voice softened. "I'm not going to tell you to go back. I'm just telling you they're unraveling." "They need to," Rachel said. "They need to feel what it's like when someone stops catching them." That night she wrote in her journal, "This isn't revenge. This is reality with the filter removed." She didn't feel triumphant. There was no parade, no thunderclap of validation, just a long, steady breath, and the realization that she hadn't checked Kayla's social media in 3 days, that she didn't care whether her father ever called again, that her mother's silence wasn't a punishment, it was a reprieve. Rachel had once believed that family meant sacrifice, that being dependable was her identity, that if she stopped giving, she'd disappear. But now she was learning something else entirely. When you stop feeding people who only show up with open hands, they don't starve. They just finally look for their own bread. And when you stop offering warmth to those who treat it like a light switch, they either learn to kindle a fire or live in the cold. Rachel chose neither. She chose herself. And in the stillness of that choice, something new took root. Not defiance, not bitterness, peace. It had been weeks since Rachel Harper stopped looking out the window expecting anyone. She'd grown into the stillness, learned to carry the silence like a shawl wrapped carefully over old bruises. Her days moved with rhythm now, measured, intentional. The ache that once woke her before sunrise had dulled into something almost elegant, like the scar on her left ankle from a childhood bike accident. A reminder, not a wound. She was preparing a stew the evening the knock came. The carrots had just started to caramelize, sizzling softly in olive oil and thyme, when she heard it, 2 slow knocks, followed by a long pause and then another. Not firm like her father's, not tentative like a delivery driver's. It was familiar in a way she didn't want it to be. Rachel didn't rush. She turned off the burner, placed the spoon gently on the counter, and wiped her hands on her apron. Then she walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Her mother stood there bundled tightly in a long puffer coat, scarf nearly swallowing her chin. She looked smaller than Rachel remembered, shoulders tucked in, gaze low, snowflakes caught in her lashes. Rachel opened the door just a few inches. "Hi," her mother said, her breath visible in the cold air. Rachel didn't speak. "I didn't call because I didn't think you'd answer," she continued, voice trembling. I thought maybe, if I came, you'd hear me." Rachel held the door. The warmth from inside drifted out, brushing against the sharp air that had settled on her mother's face, but she didn't open it wider. "I took the bus," her mother added. "Had to walk the last bit. It's colder than I expected." "Why are you here?" Rachel asked softly. Her mother swallowed. "Because I didn't know how else to say I'm sorry." Those words had lived in Rachel's dreams for years, though she had long since stopped believing they would arrive. And now, hearing them, she didn't feel vindicated. She felt still. "I'm not here to beg," her mother said. "I just want to say what I should have said a long time ago. I was wrong. Not just about Thanksgiving, about everything." She glanced down at her boots, snow melting around the edges. "I let you carry too much. I let you be the backbone without ever asking how strong you were willing to be. I watched you send money, fix problems, soften blows, and I let myself believe you didn't need the same in return." Rachel stood quietly. Her heart didn't race. She didn't feel the sting of tears. What she felt more than anything was a quiet confirmation of what she had already come to know, that sometimes the apology comes too late, not because it's undeserved, but because the person it was meant for has already outgrown the need for it. You didn't say anything when we kept turning to you, her mother went on. You didn't ask for credit. And when Kayla got all the space, all the grace, I told myself it was because she needed it, because she was fragile. But I see now. That was never an excuse to leave you alone in your strength. Rachel opened the door slightly wider, not to invite her in, but to allow more of the warmth to reach her mother's shaking frame. I'm not angry, Rachel said. I've already moved through that, but I'm not the person who would have dropped everything just because you showed up. I don't live like that anymore. I understand, her mother whispered. There was a long silence between them, filled with breath, with memory, with all the years that could not be undone. Then Rachel asked, Where's Dad? He's home. He didn't know I came. He's proud. Still thinks you'll come around if he just waits it out. But I couldn't wait anymore. It's not about the cold anymore. It's about what we broke. Rachel nodded slightly. I'm not asking for you to fix anything, her mother said. I just wanted you to hear it. From me. That I see it now. I see you. Rachel could have collapsed into that sentence once, but not anymore. She'd built a life on her own name now, her own choices, her own fire. You should head back before the buses stop, Rachel said, not unkindly. Her mother nodded, eyes welling but not spilling. If you ever decide to talk again, she said, you'll always be my daughter, whether you believe I earned that or not. I am your daughter, Rachel said, but I don't owe you the pieces of myself you didn't value when they were whole. Her mother stepped back, her breath catching just slightly. Fair, she said, that's fair. Rachel closed the door slowly, watching her mother walk down the steps, each movement soft against the falling snow. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse onto the couch or write another journal entry. She went back to her stew, stirred it slowly, added a dash more salt, and let it simmer. That night, she wrapped herself in her favorite blanket and watched a movie she'd loved since college, one she used to put on during the holidays when she was too tired to travel home, but still needed to feel like someone understood her. The dialogue felt different now. Not distant, but earned. In the middle of the film, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Haley. Your mom just told me she came to see you. I'm proud of you, Rach. No matter how this ends. Rachel smiled. Just a small one. But it was real. The next morning, she woke to a sky so clear it felt like forgiveness. Not forgiveness of her family, but of herself. For the years she'd spent apologizing just for having boundaries, for wanting love that wasn't conditional, for needing more than survival. She stood at her window, a cup of tea warming her palms, and whispered, I'm not cold anymore. And she wasn't. Not because someone else had finally brought her warmth, but because she had learned how to make it herself, and that was a kind of power no one could ever take back. The first week of January arrived with the kind of hush that felt ceremonial. Snow clung to the windowsills of Rachel Harper's apartment, like nature itself was honoring her silence. The holiday lights across the street flickered dimly against the backdrop of a city still wrapped in sleep. And in that quiet, Rachel found herself not lonely, but whole. She moved slowly that morning. There was no rush. The calendar didn't hold expectations. She boiled water for tea, cinnamon and cardamom steeping in the pot, the scent curling through her kitchen. Her apartment was still, filled with the warmth of decisions made and paths chosen. There were no calls from her parents, no midnight texts from Kayla, no footsteps at her door, just the steady hum of her heater and the breath of her own calm. A few days after her mother had shown up, there had been a strange calm. Not the deceptive kind that makes you think a storm is coming, but a true settling. As if the sky above had finally agreed that Rachel had done enough. She began to spend her evenings writing again. Not journaling, but real writing. Short essays, observations, half-finished poems. Words that had once belonged to her, reclaimed now after years of serving as everyone else's translator, mediator, and quiet savior. She wrote about the sound of snow falling, about the way silence doesn't mean absence, and about the difference between peace and relief. The words weren't for anyone. They simply needed to live. Haley checked in once a week. Their conversations became a thread Rachel hadn't expected to rely on so much. But there was comfort in being seen by someone who didn't need her to bleed to feel connected. Haley spoke of their relatives in Denver, how some had started asking where Rachel disappeared to. Rachel would laugh softly and say, "I didn't disappear. I just stopped arriving when I wasn't invited." There was a dignity in that. By mid-January, Rachel noticed that the house on Juniper Street had been listed for sale. She had found the posting while absent-mindedly scrolling through a local real estate page. The photos were hauntingly familiar. The faded carpet, the chipped paint on the stair rail, the dent in the wall at the end of the hallway where Kayla had once thrown a shoe during an argument. They hadn't even tried to stage it, just took the pictures, posted them, and moved on. It should have hurt, but it didn't. Rachel stared at the listing for a moment, then closed her laptop and stood up to fold laundry. That house had once been the center of her world. Now it was just an address on a screen. She didn't ask where her parents had gone, didn't reach out to see if they had found a new place. She figured if they truly wanted her to know, they would find a way to tell her without asking for something in return. What amazed her most wasn't how they'd let her go, but how peacefully she'd let them. In her apartment, Rachel began to create new traditions. Every Sunday, she made soup. Different every time, sometimes lentil with lemon and dill, other times sweet potato and coconut milk. She started sharing leftovers with her neighbor, and one week, Mr. Jennings brought her an old jazz album he said reminded him of her. "Not loud," he said, "but it lingers." She had friends now, too, not many, but enough. Leah from the distribution center invited her to a book club, and though Rachel didn't say much at first, by the third meeting she was hosting them in her living room with mulled cider and a fire crackling in the corner. They talked about novels, about endings that disappointed, and characters who felt too close to home. Rachel didn't mention her family, and no one asked. She liked it that way. One afternoon in late January, she stopped by the used bookstore downtown. The owner, a soft-spoken man named Julian, greeted her with a smile. "Back for something specific?" he asked. "Something about starting over," Rachel said, scanning the shelves. He handed her a novel she hadn't heard of. The cover was simple, just a woman walking into the horizon, snow in the background. Rachel opened it, read the first line, and bought it without reading further. That night, she curled up on the couch, book in hand, the snow tapping gently against her window. As she read, she found herself pausing, not because the story was confusing, but because it mirrored her too closely. A woman who had given everything away and finally asked, "What do I deserve that isn't borrowed from someone else's comfort?" She didn't cry. She just read on. Sometimes, late at night, she'd wonder if they were thinking about her. If her father regretted standing on her doorstep in the cold, offering excuses instead of ownership. If her mother replayed the silence that followed her apology. If Kayla ever considered that not everyone gets endless chances to be forgiven. But those thoughts were fleeting. They passed like wind through cracks she had since sealed. Rachel no longer stalked Kayla's social media, no longer hovered over text messages unsent, no longer reread old voicemails hoping to hear love behind obligation. What she read now were books. What she revisited were recipes. What she hoped for now had nothing to do with being needed. One evening, while watching the snow pile high on the fire escape, Rachel wrote a single sentence in her journal. "I no longer chase warmth from people who once handed me the cold." That was it. No elaboration, no metaphor, just the truth. On the final day of January, she bundled up and went for a long walk. The air was sharp, but she moved slowly, hands tucked in her coat pockets. As she passed a row of old brick houses, she saw a mother with 2 children building a lopsided snowman. The smallest child laughed so loudly it echoed off the sidewalk. The sound wrapped around Rachel like sunlight in winter. It was not her laughter, not her memory, but it was enough. When she got home, there was a letter in her mailbox, handwritten, no return address. She opened it on the kitchen counter. It was from her mother. It didn't ask for money. It didn't offer excuses. It didn't beg for reconnection. It simply said, "I still think of you when I set the table. And I hope one day, if you ever feel ready, There's still a chair waiting. Rachel folded the letter slowly and placed it in a drawer. Not because she forgave everything, not because she planned to write back, but because it didn't hurt to read it. Some things had changed, others hadn't. But what mattered now was that Rachel no longer shaped herself to fit someone else's emptiness. She no longer confused being helpful with being worthy. She didn't need to earn her place anymore. She had created it. In books, in bread, in silence, in laughter that wasn't hers, but still warmed her. And when February arrived, gentle and cold, Rachel opened her window, let the air in, and whispered to herself, "This life is mine, and that is enough." Rachel Harper's story is not extraordinary in the way people expect from stories worth telling. There were no flashing lights, no lawsuits, no screaming matches, or dramatic reunions at an airport terminal. No, her story is quieter. But its quietness is precisely what makes it unforgettable. It is a story so many of us live quietly, without language for it, until we hear someone else say it out loud and realize, that was me too. What began with a single phone call, a father telling his daughter not to come home for Thanksgiving, was, in truth, the unraveling of years' worth of misalignment, imbalance, and invisible burdens. Rachel's life was a slow-burning sacrifice. She didn't give all at once. She gave in inches. A bill here, a transfer there. One less meal out, one more sleepless night. And all the while, she did it without demanding thanks, because that's what love was supposed to look like. That's what she was told. Love shows up. Love sacrifices. But what no one told her was that love should be mutual. That care without recognition isn't noble. It's depleting. That peace purchased at the expense of your presence isn't peace at all. Rachel wasn't just excluded from a holiday. She was cut out of belonging. And that exclusion, disguised as keeping the peace, revealed the truth. Her value had been tied too closely to her usefulness. Over time, her silence had made it easy for them to forget that she too had limits. When she finally said no, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in necessity, it was like tectonic plates shifting beneath an old, cracked house. The family's foundations trembled. They had relied on her without ever truly seeing her. And when she removed herself from the equation, the absence was undeniable. Not because she sought to hurt them, but because for the first time, she prioritized her own breath over their comfort. What followed was not a movie-worthy transformation. Rachel didn't run back. They didn't suddenly fall to their knees with perfect apologies. The change was slower, more honest. It came in silence, in cold rooms, in missed meals and canceled services, in Instagram stories masked as suffering but bloated with entitlement. And Rachel, instead of reacting, simply watched, because she had nothing left to prove. And then came the knock. Her mother, finally shedding the armor of denial and offering something real, a late but sincere apology. One that didn't demand, didn't manipulate. And in that moment, Rachel did something remarkable. She didn't slam the door. She didn't burst into tears. She stood in her own warmth, her own light, and said what so few find the strength to say, "I'm not angry, but I'm not returning." There is something unspeakably powerful about not needing revenge to feel resolved. Rachel's journey wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries. It was about teaching others what happens when you stop handing over the pieces of yourself for free. As the winter deepened and her family fell further into the consequences of their own neglect, Rachel's life bloomed, not with wealth or applause, but with peace. She filled her time with books, soups, shared laughter, and new traditions. And through this, she discovered that healing doesn't always come in the form of reconciliation. Sometimes it's solitude. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's walking away without bitterness, without closure, and still knowing you made the right choice. And now, as we reflect on her story, there's a profound lesson we can take into our own lives. Kindness without boundaries becomes a cage. You can love deeply, give generously, and still say no. Your worth is not measured by how much of yourself you erase to make others comfortable. Rachel taught us that the bravest thing you can do is let people feel the weight of your absence after taking your presence for granted for too long. In our lives, we often fear what will happen if we stop showing up. If we stop covering the cost, carrying the emotional load, or smoothing over the family tension. But what Rachel's story reminds us is that real healing doesn't begin until the performance ends. Until we stop pretending we're okay with being the one who always bends. Until we dare to say, enough. And when we do, when we finally stop bending, stop explaining, stop overcompensating, something sacred happens. We meet ourselves again. We rediscover what it feels like to be whole. And from that wholeness, we can choose the life we actually want, not the one we inherited. Now, let me ask you something. Imagine you were in Rachel's shoes. Over years, you quietly paid for everything, never asked for credit, and then, one day, you were excluded from the family celebration to keep the peace. What would you do? Would you A, stay quiet, hoping that your sacrifices would one day be appreciated? B, step back, set boundaries, and let others take responsibility for their own comfort? Comment below with your answer, A or B. There's no wrong choice here, just honesty. Your response matters more than you know, and your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And what about you? Have you ever had to walk away to protect your own peace? Do you believe it's possible to love people and still leave them behind when they refuse to grow with you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Share your story if you're comfortable. This space is for reflection, for connection, and for truth. If Rachel's story touched something in you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even see your own life more clearly, I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel. Your support is what allows us to keep telling these real, raw, and deeply human stories. We have so much more ahead, so many voices still waiting to be heard, because sometimes all it takes to change a life is hearing someone else say, "Me too."